At 6 in the morning on December 31st, the intercom in my apartment started buzzing like an emergency alarm. I opened my eyes in the darkness of my room, my heart pounding against my chest, thinking something terrible had happened. I stumbled into my slippers, the cold of the floor seeping through my bare feet, and walked to the entrance without turning on any lights. I pressed the button and heard something that made my blood run cold. It was 12 people, 12 of Madison's relatives, my daughter-in-law, standing in front of the building's entrance with enormous suitcases, grocery bags, and half-asleep children in their arms, all wearing the expressions of people expecting to be welcomed with open arms. The voice of Linda, Madison's mother, came through the speaker with that false sweetness I knew all too well. "Eleanor, dear, we're here. Michael told us to come straight to your place. Please, buzz us in. The kids are tired from the trip." I felt my fingers freeze on the intercom button. Michael, my son, had given them my address. He had told them to come to my apartment without asking me, without warning me, without even considering that I might have other plans, or simply the desire to be alone. I activated the speaker, and what came out of my mouth was barely a choked whisper. But the words I said next changed absolutely everything. Let me explain how I reached that breaking point, because none of this makes sense without context. My name is Eleanor. I'm 69 years old, and I live alone in a 7th-floor apartment that smells of freshly brewed coffee in the mornings and lavender at night. This place is my sanctuary, my territory, the only space in the world where I can breathe without asking permission. After Robert passed away 5 years ago, this apartment became more than a home. It became my entire identity. Every object has its exact place. The white porcelain cups are arranged by size on the top shelf in the kitchen. The books in the living room are organized alphabetically, even though almost no one ever comes to see them. The plants on the balcony get watered every Wednesday and Saturday, without fail, and have grown so much that some are already touching the ceiling. My routine is sacred. I get up at 7, make coffee in the Italian coffee maker I brought back from my trip to Rome 15 years ago, and sit by the window to watch the city wake up. The buildings across from mine light up window by window, like lights on a giant Christmas tree. I hear the sound of cars down below, the distant murmur of life going on. But from up here, everything feels soft, manageable, under control. I always eat the same thing for breakfast: toast with strawberry jam, a small portion of cottage cheese, and an apple cut into quarters. Afterward, I wash the dishes immediately because I can't stand seeing a messy kitchen. I wipe the table with a damp cloth, arrange the chairs, and then my day begins. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I go to the market. I walk slowly through the aisles, checking each item, comparing prices, even though I already know how much everything costs by heart. I like to touch the fruits, to feel their texture, to smell them to see if they're ripe. The lady who sells vegetables knows me and always sets aside the firmest tomatoes for me. On Friday afternoons, I go to my knitting class at the neighborhood community center. There are 6 of us women, all over 60, and we sit in a circle knitting scarves, hats, and blankets while we talk about our lives. They talk about their grandchildren, their ailments, the problems with their adult children who never visit. I listen more than I talk. I don't like to share too much. I learned that when you tell people your problems, they later use them against you. Michael is my only son. He's 42 years old. He works at a tech company, though I've never quite understood what they do, and he's been married to Madison for 8 years. At first, when he introduced her to me, I thought she was a nice girl. She smiled a lot, brought dessert when they came to visit, and asked about my health. But over time, I started to notice things. Little details that I initially ignored because I didn't want to be that bitter mother-in-law who hates her son's wife. Madison has a way of speaking that sounds kind, but is full of invisible barbs. She'll say, "Oh, Eleanor, what a lovely blouse, although that shade of green isn't really in style anymore," and you're left not knowing if you've been complimented or insulted. She reorganizes things in my kitchen when she visits, moving my pans around and saying it's more practical that way, without asking if I want her to touch my things. Once, she brought a new tablecloth and put it on my table without telling me, saying mine was too worn out, as if my opinion didn't matter in my own home. But I stayed quiet. I always stayed quiet. Because Michael seemed happy, and I didn't want to be the mother who causes trouble. Every time I felt that annoyance growing in my chest, I would take a deep breath and remind myself to be understanding, that modern families are like this, that I come from a different generation, and maybe I was being too sensitive. I swallowed my words, smiled and nodded, storing every little humiliation in an invisible drawer inside my chest that was getting fuller and fuller. My relationship with Michael changed after he got married. Before, he would call me 3 times a week. We'd have lunch together on Sundays. He would tell me about his problems at work, his plans for the future. But Madison came along and slowly built a wall between us, so thin it was almost unnoticeable, but so solid that we could no longer reach each other. The calls became bi-weekly, then monthly. Lunches were canceled with last-minute excuses. They had a commitment. Madison wasn't feeling well, there was too much traffic. And I accepted it all without complaining. Because that's what good mothers do, right? They step aside. They don't bother anyone. They don't make demands. They just wait for their children to remember them once in a while. That morning on December 31st, with the intercom buzzing and those 12 people waiting downstairs, all those swallowed words, all those accumulated silences, all those times I said yes when I wanted to scream no, gathered in my throat like a ball of fire. I pressed the intercom button and heard my own voice come out strangely calm, almost cold. "Hang on a moment. I'm coming down to let you in." I hung up before Linda could reply. I stood there in front of the unit, staring at the little red light blinking in the darkness of the hallway, and something inside me broke. It wasn't a dramatic break. There were no tears or screams. It was more like when a glass shatters in slow motion. First, a thin, almost invisible crack appears, and then everything crumbles into pieces so small they can never be put back together. I walked to my bedroom, turned on the light, and saw myself in the closet mirror. A 69-year-old woman with messy gray hair, a sleep-creased face, and tired eyes. I wondered at what point I had become invisible to my own son. At what point my life had stopped mattering. I dressed slowly, choosing each piece of clothing with care, though I'm not sure why. A pair of brown pants, a cream-colored blouse, a mustard-yellow knitted sweater I had made myself last winter. I washed my face with cold water, combed my hair back into a low ponytail, and put on my glasses. I needed to see everything clearly. Every detail, every gesture, every word that was about to come. I took the stairs instead of the elevator. I needed those 7 floors of distance to think, to prepare, to decide what I was going to do. My footsteps echoed in the stairwell, a dry, lonely sound that reminded me of my own heartbeat. When I opened the building door, the early morning chill hit my face like a slap. There they all were. Linda with her huge fake smile, carrying a bag full of Tupperware that surely contained food I hadn't asked for. Steve, her husband, a large, loud man who always spoke too loudly, was dragging 2 giant suitcases. There were 3 of Madison's brothers with their respective wives, 4 small children running between the adults' legs, and 2 teenagers glued to their phones who didn't even look up when I appeared. They all looked at me with that expression of relief, as if I were their salvation, as if my apartment were a sanctuary that belonged to them by divine right. "Eleanor, so good of you to open up quickly," Linda said, moving toward me as if we were lifelong friends. The trip was horrible. 8 hours on the highway. The kids wouldn't stop crying, and Steve took the wrong exit twice. "We're exhausted. Michael told us it was no problem, that you'd be delighted to have us for New Year's. So nice to have such a generous mother-in-law, isn't it?" She hugged me before I could back away, and I smelled her sickly sweet perfume mixed with travel sweat. She let go and started ushering everyone inside the building, as if she owned the place. I didn't say a word. Absolutely nothing. I just stood there, holding the door open while they all filed in, dragging suitcases, carrying children, all talking at the same time about the traffic, the heat, their fatigue, the excitement of spending the holidays in the city. No one asked how I was. No one asked if it was really okay for them to come. No one seemed to notice that it was 6 in the morning and that I had just been woken from my sleep without any consideration. We went up in the elevator in 2 groups because we couldn't all fit. I went up in the second trip, squeezed between suitcases and the smell of reheated food coming from Linda's containers. The elevator climbed slowly, making that metallic noise it always does, and I watched the numbers light up one after another. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Each floor was a second closer to the moment I would have to open my apartment door and let the chaos in. When we arrived, the first group was already waiting outside. I took the keys out of my pocket and held them for a moment in my hand, feeling the weight of the cold metal. These keys opened my sacred space, my place of peace, my only refuge in the world. And I was about to hand it over to a group of strangers who didn't even respect me enough to let me know they were coming. I put the key in the lock, turned it, and the door opened with a soft click. Everyone flooded in like a wave, invading every corner, filling the silence with voices and laughter and heavy footsteps. The children ran into the living room, screaming with excitement. Steve dropped the suitcases in the middle of the hallway with a loud thud. Linda went straight to the kitchen, opening the cabinets and the refrigerator as if it were her own house, commenting loudly that we needed to go grocery shopping because there wasn't enough food for everyone. I stood by the closed door, watching as my quiet, orderly apartment transformed into a bustling marketplace in a matter of minutes. One of the children knocked over one of my plants on the balcony, and soil spilled all over the hardwood floor. No one apologized. One of Madison's sisters-in-law sat in my favorite armchair, the one by the window where I sit every morning to drink my coffee, and put her dirty feet up on my coffee table. The teenagers went into my bedroom without asking, looking for outlets to charge their phones. Linda started taking all her food out of the Tupperware and filling my refrigerator, pushing my things to the back, throwing out my yogurt which she claimed was expired even though I had bought it 3 days ago. And then my phone rang. It was Michael. Of course it was Michael. I answered, and his voice sounded cheerful, carefree, as if everything was perfectly normal. "Mom, are they there yet? Sorry I didn't tell you sooner, but it was a last-minute thing. Madison's family needed a place to stay for the holidays, and I figured you wouldn't mind. After all, you live alone and have plenty of space. It's just for a few days. Madison and I will be there tomorrow night for New Year's Eve dinner. Have you prepped everything? Remember, there are like 20 of us, counting everyone. Buy enough food, okay? And Mom, please be nice to my wife's family. You know how Madison is. She gets offended easily." I closed my eyes. I pressed the phone against my ear until it hurt. I felt all the words I had stored for years begin to rise in my throat, hot and sharp like knives. But I didn't let them out. Not yet. Instead, I took a deep breath and said in the softest voice I could manage, "I understand, honey. Don't worry. I'll take care of everything." I hung up before he could reply. I stood there in the middle of the hallway, surrounded by strangers who had invaded my home, listening to the noise of screaming children, of Linda reorganizing my kitchen, of Steve turning on my television at full volume. And it was in that precise moment that I knew exactly what I was going to do. I didn't explode. I didn't scream. I didn't ask them to leave. That's what anyone would have expected, right? That a 69-year-old woman would lose her temper at such an invasion and throw everyone out on the street. But I learned a long time ago that silent rage is much more powerful than shouting. People expect a scene. They prepare for a fight, but no one knows what to do with icy calm. So I smiled. I approached Linda in the kitchen and said in a sweet voice, "It's so good you brought food. Make yourself at home. This is your house now." She looked at me, surprised, perhaps expecting an objection, but only found my perfectly calm smile. I patted her on the shoulder and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her confused. I walked to the living room where Steve had turned the TV to a sports channel with the volume so high it made the glasses on the shelf vibrate. I sat on the sofa next to his, crossed my legs, and asked with genuine interest, "What's on?" He glanced at me, surprised that I didn't ask him to lower the volume, and started explaining something about a football championship that I frankly couldn't care less about. I nodded, asked questions. I acted like the perfect hostess. The children continued to run through the apartment. One of them climbed onto my sofa with muddy shoes. The mother, one of Madison's sisters named Jessica, didn't even scold him. I got up, brought a damp cloth, and cleaned the sofa while telling the boy, "Don't worry, sweetie. Accidents happen." Jessica looked at me with relief, clearly expecting me to make a scene. I spent that entire day being the perfect grandmother, the ideal mother-in-law, the generous hostess everyone expected me to be. I made coffee for everyone. I took the clean sheets from my closet and helped set up makeshift beds in the living room and the study. I even gave my own bedroom to Linda and Steve because they needed privacy and comfort at their age. As Linda said without a hint of irony, I would sleep on the living room sofa, in my own home, on the sofa. But I nodded with a smile and said it was no problem at all, that they'd had a long trip and deserved a good rest. The look on Linda's face when I said that was one of absolute satisfaction, as if she had won a battle I didn't even know we were fighting. During lunch, which of course I had to cook because the food they brought wasn't enough for everyone, I heard Madison's sisters talking about me as if I weren't there. They were sitting at my table, eating my food, using my plates, and one of them, Tiffany, said, "Madison is so lucky to have such a quiet mother-in-law. Mine is unbearable, always meddling in everything." The other one, Heather, replied with a laugh, "Of course, this old lady lives alone. She has nothing better to do than wait on us. She must be happy to have the company." Old lady. That's what she called me, as if I were a piece of old, useful furniture there for her convenience. I continued serving the food, smiling, nodding, without saying a single word. In the afternoon, while everyone was napping, scattered around my apartment as if it were a free hostel, I went out onto the balcony to breathe. The plants I had cared for years were crushed by suitcases someone had carelessly piled up. The soil was still spilled on the floor. No one had cleaned up the mess. I bent down, picked up the pieces of the broken pot, and held them in my hands. That plant was a fern Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary. It had survived a move, 2 terrible winters, and 5 years without him. And now it was destroyed because a careless child wasn't taught to respect other people's things. I felt something harden inside my chest, like when cement dries and turns into solid, unmovable stone. That night, after making dinner for everyone, after washing the dishes while the others watched television, after tucking the children into makeshift mattresses on my study floor, I sat on the living room sofa where I was supposed to sleep. It was 11 at night. The apartment was finally quiet, though I could hear Steve's snores coming from my bedroom. My bedroom, where someone else was sleeping in my bed, under my sheets, surrounded by my things. I took out my phone and looked at the screen. Michael hadn't called back. Not even a text asking how I was, if I needed help, if everything was okay. Nothing. To him, I had simply fulfilled my function, to be the empty space where others could deposit their problems. I opened my contact list and searched for a name I hadn't dialed in months. David, my younger brother. He lives in another city. We don't talk much, but we've always had that silent connection that siblings who've survived a difficult childhood together share. I dialed his number. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice sleepy. "Eleanor? What's wrong? Are you okay?" I only realized I was crying when I heard my own voice break as I answered. "David, I need to ask you something. Do you remember your friend Mark, the one who works in real estate?" There was a silence on the other end. Then his voice, now fully awake and alert. "Yeah. Why?" I took a deep breath, wiped my tears with the back of my hand, and said, "I need to sell my apartment. Fast." What followed was a 40-minute conversation in a low voice so as not to wake anyone. David didn't ask stupid questions. He didn't tell me I was overreacting or that I should think it over. He just listened as I told him everything. The invasion, Michael's words, years of being ignored and minimized, the broken plant, the muddy sofa, my own bed occupied by strangers. When I finished, he sighed and said, "You deserve better than this, sis. Give me until tomorrow. Mark is good. He'll help you." We hung up and I sat there in the dark, feeling my decision take solid form inside me. It wasn't revenge. Or maybe it was, but of the purest kind, reclaiming what was mine, even if it meant destroying everything in the process. The 31st dawned with more chaos. The children woke up at 6, screaming that they were hungry. Linda came out of my room, yawning, and asking for coffee as if I were a maid. Madison called at 8 to say that she and Michael would be arriving later because they had to stop by a friend's house first. Later. In my mind, I translated that as, "You are not a priority. I am not a priority." I hung up the phone and continued making breakfast for 12 people who ate as if they hadn't seen food in days, without saying thank you, without clearing a single plate, without wiping up a crumb. While everyone was eating, the doorbell rang. It was Mark. David had kept his word. I opened the door, and there stood a man in his 50s. Gray suit, briefcase in hand, professional smile. Mrs. Eleanor? I'm Mark, a friend of your brother David. I'm here about the apartment. I let him in. Linda looked up from the table, confused. Who is this? I smiled at her sweetly and replied, a friend who came to help me with some boring paperwork. Don't worry, keep eating. Mark and I shut ourselves out on the balcony. I showed him every corner of the apartment from the outside, explained the situation. He took notes, nodded, assessed. After 20 minutes, he looked at me seriously and said, I can get you a buyer in a week. I have several clients looking in this area, but it has to be fast and the price will be a little lower than what you could get with more time. I looked him in the eye and said without hesitation, I accept. We spent the whole day finalizing details while Madison's family turned my apartment into a battlefield. There were clothes thrown everywhere, dirty dishes piling up in the kitchen, stains on my beige carpet that would never fully come out. Heather went into my bathroom and used my cosmetics without asking, leaving everything a mess. One of the children found my box of memories in the closet and scattered old photographs across the living room floor. Photos of Robert, of Michael as a boy, of my wedding, all trampled by dirty shoes. I picked up each photograph carefully, cleaned them, and put them away again. No one apologized. No one even seemed to notice that something valuable had been mistreated. At 7 p.m, Michael and Madison finally arrived. She walked in beaming, in a coral-colored dress that probably cost more than $500, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. Michael followed behind, carrying 2 bottles of wine and a bag of gifts. They greeted me with quick kisses on the cheek, and then went straight to hug Madison's family, laughing, joking, acting as if this were the most natural place in the world to be. Madison looked around, assessing every detail, and said loudly, Eleanor, the house is a disaster. Couldn't you have kept it tidier? That's when something inside me finally clicked. I stood there staring at Madison with her coral dress and her perfect smile, waiting for my response. All eyes in the room turned to me. Linda stopped talking. Steve lowered the volume on the TV. Even the children fell silent for a second. It was the perfect moment to explode, to say everything I had held back, to defend my territory and my dignity. But I had learned something very important in my 69 years. People like Madison feed on direct conflict. They expect a fight because they know how to win it. They are practiced at playing the victim, at turning situations around, at making you the bad guy in the story. So instead of taking the bait, I smiled and said in a soft voice, You're right, Madison. With so many people, it's hard to keep things in order. But don't worry. I've already found the perfect solution to make sure this never happens again. She blinked, confused. Michael looked at me with relief, clearly thinking I had given in, that I had accepted my place as the submissive, accommodating mother-in-law. That's the spirit, Mom, he said, patting me on the shoulder as if I were a child who had finally learned her lesson. I knew you'd understand. Family is the most important thing, right? I nodded, kept my smile, and went back to the kitchen to continue preparing New Year's Eve dinner. As I chopped vegetables, I listened to their conversations in the living room. Madison talking about her job, bragging about a recent promotion. Michael laughing with his brothers-in-law, talking about a trip they were planning to take to Europe in the spring. No one asked how I was. No one offered to help with the food. I was just the stage on which they performed their play. Dinner was ready at 9 p.m. Roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, salads, freshly baked bread, desserts. I spent nearly $300 on ingredients that I bought with my own pension, money I had been saving to fix the leak in my bathroom. The table wasn't big enough, so we had to use the study table as well and put boards on sawhorses in the living room. 20 people crammed together, eating, talking, laughing. I served every plate, filled every glass, made sure everyone had enough. When I finally sat down, there was almost no food left. Michael didn't even notice. He was too busy toasting with Steve, promising that next year they would all come to his city to celebrate there. After dinner came the gift exchange. Madison had brought a huge bag full of packages wrapped in shiny paper. Gifts for her parents, her brothers, the children. They all opened them with excitement, shouting and thanking her. For me, there was nothing, not even a card. Michael noticed and became uncomfortable. "Mom, sorry. We forgot your gift in the rush. We'll bring it to you next week, okay?" Next week. As if I were a pending task on his to-do list. Madison didn't even have the decency to apologize. She just shrugged and said, "Well, Eleanor never tells us what she wants. It's hard to buy things for her." "Because you never asked," I thought. But out loud I just said, "Don't worry, I don't need anything." It was 20 minutes to midnight when Madison decided to rearrange my living room. She literally started moving furniture because, according to her, it would look better for the pictures. She moved my favorite armchair against the wall, pushed the coffee table into a corner, and moved the lamp. Linda helped her, the two of them laughing and decorating my space as if it were a photo studio. I watched them from the kitchen as I washed dishes, seeing them transform my home into something unrecognizable. Heather took out her phone and started taking pictures for her social media, posing in front of my window with a glass of wine in hand, with a caption I managed to read over her shoulder. "New Year's with the family at the best mother-in-laws in the world." She didn't even know my name. Midnight arrived. Everyone toasted, hugged, and shouted Happy New Year with a joy that seemed obscene to me. Michael gave me a quick, distracted hug, already looking for Madison for the midnight kiss. No one else wished me a Happy New Year. I stood by the window, watching the fireworks light up the sky, thinking of all the New Year's Eves I had spent in this apartment. The first ones with Robert, when we were still young and had dreams. The years with a young Michael, when he would run around the living room with party hats and noisemakers. The first years alone, sad and silent, learning to live with the emptiness. And now this one, surrounded by people, but more alone than ever. At 1 a.m, when everyone was tired from dancing and drinking, Madison announced that she and Michael were going to a hotel to sleep. Of course they were. They had only come for dinner, for the photos, to fulfill the minimum protocol. They weren't going to stay to help clean up the disaster or deal with the relatives they had brought. Michael gave me a kiss on the forehead and said, "Thanks for everything, Mom. I knew I could count on you." And they left, leaving me with 12 people who began to prepare for sleep, claiming spaces, asking for clean sheets, complaining about the heat, the cold, the discomfort. Linda grabbed my arm as I was trying to go to the bathroom and said in that sweet but firm voice I knew, "Eleanor, tomorrow we need you to take us to the mall. The kids want to see the city and we want to buy some things. What time can you take us?" It wasn't a question. It was a command disguised as a polite request. I told her I would think about it and locked myself in the bathroom, the only place I could be alone for 5 minutes. I sat on the floor with my back against the door and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything crushing my chest. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Mark. "I have a buyer, a businessman who needs to close fast, offering $400,000, cash, closing in 2 weeks. It's a good price considering the urgency. Accept." My hands were shaking as I typed the reply. $400,000. It was less than the apartment was really worth. Probably about $50,000 below market price. But it was enough to buy something smaller, simpler, just for me, and I would still have money left over to live comfortably. I typed, "I accept. Proceed with everything." I sent the message and stared at the screen until the reply appeared. "Perfect. I'll send you the papers tomorrow." I left the bathroom and found Jessica waiting outside with an annoyed look on her face. "Finally. I thought you died in there. End of tea." She pushed past me without apologizing. I walked to the living room and saw my apartment destroyed. There were dirty glasses on every surface, crumpled napkins on the floor, wine stains on my carpet, food crumbs everywhere. The sofa where I was supposed to sleep was occupied by 2 of the teenagers who had fallen asleep watching television. There was no place for me. In my own home, there was no place for me. I grabbed a blanket from the closet and went to the balcony. It was cold, but I didn't care. I wrapped myself in the blanket and sat on the plastic chair I used for reading in the afternoons. From there, I could see the city still awake, the lights of other buildings, hear the distant echo of music and celebrations. I thought about Robert. What would he say if he could see me now? He would probably be angry. He would tell me to throw them all out, to defend my space, to not let them walk all over me. But Robert was always braver than me. I had spent my whole life being accommodating, seeking approval, swallowing my words and needs so as not to bother anyone. Until now. The next 2 days were a calculated hell. Linda insisted I take her sightseeing. The children broke a vase that had belonged to my grandmother. Madison came by every afternoon to supervise that I was treating her family well, as if I were an employee who needed watching. Michael would call, but he never asked how I was, only gave me instructions. Buy this, take my mother-in-law there, be patient. Patience. As if patience were an infinite resource I was obligated to provide. On the morning of the 3rd day, Mark arrived with the papers. Linda answered the door thinking it was someone else, and almost sent him away. I intervened quickly. He's my accountant, here to go over some tax matters. We locked ourselves in my bedroom, which I had finally reclaimed because Linda and Steve decided the living room sofa was more comfortable. I signed each paper with trembling but determined hands. The sale was done. The apartment was no longer mine. I had exactly 14 days to vacate. When Mark left, I sat on my bed and looked around. Every corner of this room held a story. There in that corner, Robert used to sit and read the newspaper on Sundays. In that closet, I kept Michael's childhood clothes that I could never throw away. At that window, I would stand and watch the sunrise on days I couldn't sleep. And now all of that was gone, by my own choice. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. I walked out of the room and found the entire family eating the lunch I had prepared. Madison was there again, sitting at the head of my table as if she owned the place. She saw me and smiled. "Eleanor, I need to talk to you after we eat. I have some suggestions on how you could organize your house better." And that's when I decided it was time to begin. I sat down at the table with everyone. I ate in silence while Madison talked nonstop about her ideas for improving my apartment. She wanted me to paint the walls white because the current ivory color made everything look very old. She suggested I throw out half of my furniture because, at your age, you need something more modern and minimalist. She said my kitchen needed a complete remodel because the dark wood cabinets were outdated. She spoke of my home as if it were a renovation project she would manage, as if I were simply an obstacle in her path to the aesthetic perfection she imagined. Everyone nodded, gave their opinions, added suggestions. Steve said the bathroom needed new tiles. Linda commented that my curtains were horrible and that she knew a place that sold beautiful ones. No one asked if I wanted to change anything. No one considered that maybe I loved my apartment exactly as it was. We finished eating, and Madison followed me into the kitchen as I cleared the plates. She leaned against the counter, blocking my path to the sink, and said in that voice she used when she wanted to sound reasonable but was actually giving orders, "Eleanor, I know this has been a lot for you. Having my whole family here must be exhausting. But I want you to understand something important. Michael and I are building our future, and we need you to be part of the team. That means being flexible, being available when we need you, understanding that family now includes mine." She paused, looked me straight in the eye, and continued. "The truth is, you live alone in an apartment that's too big. We've been thinking that maybe it would be better for you to move into something smaller, more manageable. That way you'd have fewer responsibilities, and you could be more available to help us when we need you to watch future grandchildren or host visitors." And there it was, what they really wanted. It wasn't just for me to be hospitable or generous. They wanted me to shrink my life, to make myself smaller, more convenient, more available for their needs. They wanted me to sell my apartment, move into something insignificant, and use the leftover money to finance their comfortable life. They had probably already planned how to spend that money, a down payment on a bigger house, that trip to Europe they mentioned, private university for the children they didn't even have yet. I would be the useful grandmother who lives in a tiny room, waiting for their call, existing only to serve them. Madison awaited my response, with the expression of someone being tremendously reasonable and generous. I put the dishes in the sink, calmly dried my hands, and told her, "You're right, Madison. I've been thinking the exact same thing." Her face lit up, clearly surprised that I had given in so easily. "Really? Oh, Eleanor, what a relief. I knew you'd understand. Michael is going to be so happy. You'll see, it's for the best for everyone." I nodded, smiled, and added, "In fact, I've already taken the first step. I hired someone to help me with the whole process." She practically jumped with excitement. "Already? Wow, that's incredible. When do you start looking at places? I can help you. I know a really good real estate agent who will find you something tiny and cheap. That won't be necessary, I said, keeping my tone casual. I've already found the perfect solution. Madison tilted her head, confused. So quickly? And what did you find? I looked her straight in the eye and replied, I already sold this apartment. The deal closed 3 hours ago. I have 2 weeks to move out. The color drained from her face. She stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, processing what she had just heard. What? What did you say? Her voice came out as a strangled whisper. I said I sold the apartment. It's signed. It's done. The new owner takes possession in exactly 14 days. Madison took a step back, then another. Her expression shifted from shock to fury in a matter of seconds. You can't do that. You can't sell without consulting Michael. This apartment is practically his too. It's his inheritance. End of pros. There was the naked truth. To them, I was just a temporary manager of assets they already considered their own. This apartment is in my name, I said in a firm voice. My name only. Robert left it to me, not to Michael, and I can do whatever I want with it. Madison began to pace in circles, her hands on her head. This is crazy. You're crazy. How much did you sell it for? Who did you sell it to? Did you consult a lawyer? They probably scammed you. Women your age are easy targets for scammers. I leaned against the counter, crossed my arms, and maintained my calm. I sold it for $400,000. The buyer is a serious businessman. Everything is legal and certified. And no, I wasn't scammed. I simply made a decision about my own life and my own property. Madison pointed a trembling finger at me. You have to cancel that sale, right now. Call whoever convinced you to do this stupid thing and cancel everything. I laughed. It was a soft but genuine laugh that seemed to enrage her even more. I'm not canceling anything. This is my decision, and it's final. She shot out of the kitchen, screaming, Michael, Michael, get in here now. Everyone in the living room fell silent. Michael ran in alarmed. What's wrong? What happened? Madison grabbed his arm, almost shaking him. Your mother sold the apartment. She sold your apartment without consulting you. You have to do something. Michael looked at me as if I had told him the earth was flat. What? Mom, is that true? I nodded. It's true. I sold the apartment. The deal is already closed. He shook his head, confused. But why? Why would you do something like that? Where are you going to go? What were you thinking? I was thinking about myself, I replied, with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. For the first time in many years, I was thinking about what I need, what I want, about my own peace. Michael ran his hands through his hair, clearly panicking. But this apartment… Mom, this place is worth a lot of money. You should have consulted me before selling. I could have advised you, gotten you a better price, made sure you weren't being swindled. And there it was again. The assumption that I was incapable of making decisions, that I needed his permission, his supervision, his approval. Linda and Steve entered the kitchen, followed by the rest of the family. They all wanted to know what was happening. Madison explained to them in a hysterical voice, dramatizing every detail, painting me as a senile old woman who had done something unforgivable. Linda looked at me with disappointment. Eleanor, this affects all of us. Where are we supposed to stay when we come to visit? Steve added. This is very selfish of you. Family sacrifices for family, Heather chimed in. And did you think about the kids? They were already used to coming here. End. I looked at them all, standing in my kitchen, circled around me as if I were the one who had done something terrible. As if taking control of my own life was an unforgivable crime. I didn't consult you, I said, raising my voice so everyone could hear me clearly. Because it wasn't your decision. This is my apartment, my life, my choice, and I'm tired of existing only for the convenience of others. Michael took a step toward me, his face red with fury. Convenience? Is that what you call family? Mom, you're acting like a spoiled child. This is ridiculous. Tomorrow we're going to a lawyer and canceling this sale. I stood my ground. I'm not canceling anything, Michael. It's already decided. He slammed his palm on the counter, making the dishes jump. Then don't count on me for anything. If you want to destroy your life, go ahead. but don't expect me to be there to pick you up when you realize the mistake you've made. The silence that followed was dense and heavy. Madison's eyes were filled with tears of rage. Linda looked at me as if I were a stranger. The others just seemed uncomfortable, waiting to see what would happen next. And I, standing in the middle of my kitchen, felt something strange and wonderful. I felt peace. Michael stormed out of the kitchen, dragging Madison with him. I heard the apartment door slam shut with a bang that shook the walls. They were gone. My son had left without looking back, without trying to understand, without even asking why I had made this decision. The others stood there, looking at me as if I had just confessed to a horrible crime. Linda broke the silence with a trembling voice. "I can't believe what you've just done. You destroyed your own son. Do you know the stress you've just caused him? Madison is sensitive. This is going to affect her terribly." I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. Madison is sensitive. The woman who had invaded my home, reorganized my things, criticized every aspect of my life, and planned my future without consulting me, was the sensitive one. "I think it's time for everyone to start looking for another place to stay," I said in a clear, firm voice. "As you heard, this apartment is no longer mine. The new owner takes possession in 2 weeks, and I need to start packing my things." Steve crossed his arms, his face a dark red. "You're kicking us out? After we came all this way trusting in your hospitality?" I held their gazes without blinking. "No one invited you. You showed up unannounced, assuming I had no life of my own, that my space was yours by right. And I made the mistake of allowing it. But that mistake ends now." Linda clutched her chest, as if she were having a heart attack. "This is unbelievable. You're a cruel woman, Eleanor. Cruel and selfish. Now I understand why Michael had to find true love in our family. You never knew how to give him what he needed." Her words were designed to hurt me, to make me doubt, to break my resolve. And maybe a week ago they would have succeeded. But something had changed inside me. I no longer cared what they thought. I no longer needed their approval or their feigned affection. "You have until noon tomorrow to find another place," I said, walking towards the living room. "You can stay tonight, but I need you to be gone tomorrow." Jessica, who had been quiet this whole time, finally spoke up. "We don't have money for a hotel. We spent everything on the trip, thinking we'd be staying here. What are we supposed to do?" I turned and looked at her. I saw a woman in her mid-30s, perfectly capable of solving her own problems, but who had learned it was easier to have others solve them for her. "That's not my problem," I said simply. "You made the decision to come without confirming. Now you have to make the decision of what to do next." The rest of the day was tense and silent. Madison's family gathered in the living room, making calls, looking for cheap hotels, complaining in low voices about how terrible I was. The children, sensing the tension, became restless and weepy. No one ate the dinner I had prepared. No one spoke to me. They treated me as if I were invisible, as if I no longer existed to them. And for the first time in days, I felt relieved. That night I slept in my own bed, in my own room. I locked the door and lay there looking at the ceiling, listening to the angry murmurs coming from the living room. I felt no guilt, no regret, only a deep exhaustion and a strange sense of freedom. The next morning, I woke up early and found the living room empty. They had all left during the night without saying goodbye, leaving behind a monumental mess. There was trash everywhere, dirty dishes piled in the sink and on the table, stains on the sofa, marks on the walls. My fern was still dead on the balcony. No one had bothered to clean up the spilled soil. I found a note from Linda on the dining table, written in large, shaky handwriting. "I hope you're happy with your decision. We will tell everyone what kind of person you really are. May God forgive you for what you did to your family." I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. I put on my most comfortable clothes and spent the entire day cleaning. I scrubbed, swept, mopped. I washed every surface until my hands ached. I wanted to erase every trace of that invasion, every footprint of those horrible days. While I worked, my phone rang constantly. Michael called again and again. I rejected every call. Finally, he left a voicemail. His tone had changed from fury to something that pretended to be conciliatory but actually sounded manipulative. "Mom, I know you're upset. We all are, but this has gotten out of hand. I spoke with Madison, and we're willing to forget everything if you cancel the sale of the apartment. We can start over. I'll help you set boundaries with her family, but you have to cancel that sale. Please, think of me, your only son. I deleted the message without replying. There was no turning back. And though he didn't understand it yet, this wasn't about punishing him. It was about saving myself. The next few days I spent alone, packing my things. Mark had helped me find a small one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood on the other side of the city. It cost half of what a similar place would to buy, but it was perfect for me. It had a small balcony that could fit 6 flower pots, a compact but functional kitchen, and large windows that let in a lot of light. I signed the lease using part of the money from the sale. As I packed, I realized how many things I had accumulated over a lifetime. Boxes full of clothes I didn't wear, books I wouldn't read again, decorative objects that only collected dust. I sorted everything into 3 categories: what I would take, what I would donate, and what I would throw away. It was liberating to get rid of so much weight. Every box I filled for donation felt like letting go of a piece of the past I no longer needed to carry. I kept only the essentials: my favorite clothes, my most beloved books, the photographs of Robert and of Michael as a boy, the dinnerware that had belonged to my mother, the plants that survived the invasion. Michael showed up a week later. He rang the doorbell insistently until I opened it. He looked terrible, with deep dark circles under his eyes and wrinkled clothes. He walked in without an invitation and looked at the boxes piled everywhere, the empty walls where pictures once hung, the bare spaces where furniture used to be. "Mom, this is real," he said in a broken voice. "You're really doing it." I leaned against the wall and looked at him. This 42-year-old man, who was still waiting for me to solve his problems, to make his life easier, to sacrifice my peace for his comfort. "Yes, Michael, it's real." And he collapsed into one of the few remaining chairs. He covered his face with his hands. "I don't understand why, Mom. What did we do that was so terrible for you to punish us like this?" And there was the problem. He saw it as a punishment, as something I was doing against him. He couldn't conceive that this had nothing to do with him at all. "It's not a punishment," I said, sitting across from him. "It's a decision. I decided to reclaim my life, my space, my right to exist for something more than serving others." "But I'm your son," he said, looking up, his eyes red. "Family is supposed to take care of each other." I felt something soften in my chest. He was my son, after all. I had raised him, loved him, given everything for him for years. But that love could no longer come at the cost of my own destruction. Family does take care of each other, Michael, but taking care doesn't mean disappearing. Taking care doesn't mean having no boundaries. And taking care definitely doesn't mean allowing yourself to be treated as if you don't matter. He shook his head. "We never treated you like you didn't matter. That's an exaggeration." I looked at him intently. "Michael, 12 people showed up at my house, unannounced at 6 in the morning. They took over every space. They broke my things. They kicked me out of my own bed. And you asked me to be nice to them. You never asked how I was. You never considered that maybe I had other plans. You treated me like an available resource, not a person." He opened his mouth to reply, but found no words. Probably because deep down, he knew it was true. "And Madison?" he finally asked. "She's devastated. She says you hate her, that you've always hated her." I sighed wearily. "I don't hate Madison, but I'm also not going to continue letting her run my life. And if you can't see the difference between hating someone and simply setting boundaries with them, then we have a bigger problem." Michael was quiet for a long time. Then he asked in a low voice, "Where are you going to go?" I gave him the address of my new apartment. He jotted it down on his phone. "Can I visit you there?" The question surprised me. I had expected more anger, more attempts at manipulation. "You can," I said, "but under the following conditions. You let me know before you come. You come alone, or with Madison, but not with her entire family. You respect my schedule and my space. And you accept that I won't be available every time you need something." He nodded slowly, processing. He got up to leave. At the door, He turned and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in years. Genuine vulnerability. "Mom, do you still love me?" The question broke my heart. "Of course I love you, Michael. I will always love you. But loving myself is not incompatible with loving you." He left without another word. The last days in the apartment were strange and melancholic. I walked through the empty rooms listening to the echo of my footsteps, touching the walls that were once filled with photographs and memories. Every corner whispered stories to me. There, Robert had spilled paint when we painted the living room ivory 20 years ago. There, Michael had hidden his first lost tooth, waiting for the tooth fairy. There, I had cried for hours after the funeral. This place had held my entire adult life, my greatest joys and my deepest sorrows, and now I was letting it go. The night before the move, I sat on the floor of the empty living room with a glass of wine. I had no furniture left. I had sold or donated everything except the essentials I would take to the new place. The moonlight streamed through the window, creating long shadows on the hardwood floor. I thought about all the decisions that had brought me to this moment. Every time I had said yes when I wanted to say no. Every time I had swallowed my discomfort to keep the peace. Every small surrender that had eventually led to me losing myself completely. But I also thought about the strength I didn't know I had, the capacity for rebuilding I had discovered at 69 years old. My phone vibrated. It was a text from David, my brother. "Arriving early tomorrow to help you move. I'm proud of you, sis." Those words made me cry. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief. Someone in my family understood. Someone supported me without judgment. I replied with a simple thank you because I didn't have the words to express everything I felt. That night I slept on the floor on an air mattress, staring at the ceiling I had stared at thousands of nights before. But this time was different. This time I knew I was choosing my own path. David arrived at 7 in the morning with a borrowed truck and 2 of his friends to help load. He hugged me tightly without saying anything, and in that hug I understood that he knew everything I had been through without needing any explanation. We loaded the boxes, the few pieces of furniture I was taking, the surviving plants. The process was quick and efficient. By 10 in the morning, the apartment was completely empty. I did one last walkthrough of each room. I ran my hand along the walls, looked out the windows one last time, breathed in the familiar smell of the place that had been my home for decades. "Are you ready?" David asked from the doorway. I nodded, grabbed my purse, and walked out. I closed the door behind me, put the keys in the envelope I would leave for the new owner at the building's management office, and walked to the elevator without looking back. The drive to my new apartment was silent. David respected my need to process everything in quiet. I looked out the window, watching the city pass by, feeling like I was leaving behind a version of myself that no longer existed. The Eleanor who lived to please, who made herself small so others could fit, who measured every word so as not to offend. That woman stayed in that 7th-floor apartment. My new home was in an older but well-maintained building, in a quiet neighborhood full of trees. The apartment was small, maybe a third of the size of the old one, but when I opened the door and walked in for the first time with my things, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt that it was mine, truly mine. Not a space I had to share, not a place others could invade, but my absolute territory. We spent the day getting everything settled. David assembled my new bed, hung the beige curtains I had bought, and helped organize the kitchen. His friends installed the shelves in the living room and connected the appliances. By the afternoon, everything was in its place. The apartment looked cozy and bright. I had put the plants on the balcony where they would get direct sun in the mornings. The books were arranged on the new shelf. The photographs of Robert were on the nightstand. My mother's dinnerware occupied the kitchen cabinet. Everything that truly mattered was there. David and his friends left at dusk after refusing my attempt to pay them. "You're my sister," David said. "You don't pay for helping family." He hugged me again and whispered in my ear, "You did the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I was left alone in my new space. I made coffee in my Italian coffee maker, sat on the balcony in a new plastic chair, and watched the sunset. The buildings here were lower. I could see more of the sky. I heard birds singing in the trees on the street. The air smelled different, cleaner, fresher. I took out my phone and saw I had several messages. One was from Mark, confirming that the money from the sale was already deposited in my account. $400,000. After paying the first year's rent in advance, the new furniture, and some moving expenses, I had over $360,000 in savings. Money that was entirely mine, that no one could touch, that would give me security for the rest of my life. The other messages were from Michael. Several texts written throughout the day. Did you move yet? Do you need help? Mom, please answer me. Madison wants to talk to you. I didn't answer any of them. I wasn't ready yet. I needed this time for myself, to settle in, to get used to this new version of my life. There was one last message from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it, and it was from Linda. I hope you're happy. Michael is suffering because of you. You are a terrible mother. I read the message twice. Then I deleted it and blocked the number. I was not going to let that poison into my new space. That night I ate a simple dinner, vegetable soup and toast. I washed my single plate and my single cup, dried them, and put them away. Then I took a long bath in the small bathtub, using lavender salts I had bought especially to christen my new life. I put on my most comfortable pajamas, made my bed with new sheets that smelled of the store, and went to bed early. The bed was firm and comfortable, the pillows were perfect. There was no one else in the apartment making noise, taking up space, demanding attention. Just me, my breath, the precious silence of chosen solitude. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I slept deeply, without nightmares, without waking up startled. I slept like someone who had finally come home. The first few weeks in my new apartment were a period of discovery and adjustment. I learned the sounds of the building, the pipe that made a strange noise every morning at 6, the footsteps of my upstairs neighbor leaving for work at 7:30, the bark of the dog from the next apartment at 5 in the afternoon when its owner returned. These were new sounds that became part of my new routine. I explored the neighborhood, walking slowly along the tree-lined streets. I found a small bakery 2 blocks away where the bread came out hot at 8 in the morning. I discovered a park with wooden benches where older women gathered to knit on Thursday afternoons. I joined them without much of an announcement, simply sitting down with my knitting, and eventually we started talking. No one there knew my story. No one knew about the sold apartment, the family that had invaded my home, the drastic decision I had made. To them, I was just Eleanor, a 69-year-old woman who lived alone and knitted mustard-colored scarves. It was liberating to be anonymous, to start from scratch, to build relationships based on who I was now, not on who I had been before. One of the women, named Rose, invited me to her house for tea. She lived in the same building as me, 3 floors up. Her apartment was similar to mine, but decorated with hundreds of photos of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told me that her children visited her every Sunday without fail, that she never felt lonely, that family was the most important thing in her life. I listened to her story with a mix of envy and relief. Envy, because she clearly had what I had lost, or perhaps never had a family that genuinely valued her. But also relief, because her life, though beautiful, was not mine. I had chosen a different path. I had chosen peace over obligation, chosen solitude over toxic companionship. And although there were still moments of doubt, of questions that woke me up at 3 in the morning wondering if I had done the right thing, most days I felt lighter than ever. Michael finally showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. He had sent a text that morning asking if he could visit. I replied yes, him alone, and gave him the address. He arrived at 4 o'clock sharp, punctual as he had always been when something mattered to him. He brought a bag from the bakery I now knew, with sweet rolls and cookies. He knocked on the door softly, and when I opened it, I saw he had gotten a haircut, was wearing clean, ironed clothes, and had made an effort to look presentable. "Hi, Mom," he said cautiously, as if I were a wild animal that might flee at any moment. "Hi, son, come on in." I let him in, and watched as his eyes scanned the small space. The entire apartment could probably fit into the living room of his house, but it was clean, orderly, and full of light. "It's nice," he finally said, and it sounded genuine. Different, but nice. I made coffee for both of us, and we sat in the small dining area by the window. There was an uncomfortable silence, filled with all the words we hadn't said, the screams we never screamed. the apologies neither of us had yet offered. "Mom, He started, then stopped, took a deep breath, and tried again. "I've been thinking a lot. About what you said. About how we treated you. And you're right." Those last two words surprised me so much, I almost spilled my coffee. "You're right," he repeated. "We didn't see you. We didn't consider you. We treated you as if your only purpose was to be available for us. And that was horrible." I felt something loosen in my chest. I hadn't known how much I needed to hear those words until that moment. "Thank you for saying that," I replied softly. "You don't know how much that means to me." He nodded, fiddling nervously with his cup. "Madison doesn't see it that way yet. She thinks you exaggerated, that you sold the apartment just to punish us. We've been fighting a lot about it." I said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "I told her that if she can't respect my decisions about my relationship with you, then we have a serious problem. She didn't take it well. She says I have to choose between the two of you." I felt a pang of guilt mixed with something darker, something that looked dangerously like satisfaction. "I don't want you to choose, Michael. I don't want to destroy your marriage." And it was true. As much harm as Madison had caused me, I didn't want to be the reason my son lost his family. "You're not destroying it," he said. "She's destroying it with her inability to see that she was wrong. We've been sleeping in separate rooms for weeks. She doesn't talk to me unless it's necessary. And honestly, Mom, for the first time in a long time, I'm seeing things I ignored before. The way she manipulates me, how she always has to be in control, how any boundary I try to set becomes a war." Hearing my son describe his marriage that way broke my heart, but it also made me realize something important. My decision, though drastic, had held up a mirror to everyone. It had forced them to see the toxic dynamics we had normalized. "What are you going to do?" I asked. He shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe couples therapy if she agrees. Maybe a separation for a while. I don't know. But what I do know is that I want to rebuild my relationship with you, and I want to do it right this time." We spent the next 2 hours talking. Really talking. Something we hadn't done in years. I told him about my new routine, about Rose and the ladies in the park, about the bakery and the neighbor's dog. He told me about his work, about projects that excited him, about dreams he had buried because Madison considered them impractical. We talked about Robert, remembering stories we had both forgotten. We laughed together for the first time in a long time. When he left, it was already dark. He gave me a long hug at the door and whispered, "I love you, Mom, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything." After he left, I sat on the balcony under the stars. The night air was cool and clean. My plants looked healthy in their new pots. The city sounded distant but present, and I felt whole. Not happy in the traditional sense, because there was still pain and loss and unanswered questions, but whole, complete, mine. The days turned into weeks. Michael visited me every Tuesday, alone, respecting my space and my time. He told me about his life, and I told him about mine. We were learning to relate as adults, not as mother and son, where one must always give and the other can always take. It was different. It was better. Madison had not tried to contact me. According to Michael, she was still angry, still feeling like the victim of a terrible injustice. I had stopped worrying about changing her perspective. One afternoon, while watering my plants on the balcony, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. It was Linda. Her voice sounded different, softer, less aggressive. "Eleanor, it's me. Please don't hang up." I remained silent, waiting. I just wanted to say that maybe I didn't understand the situation correctly. Madison told me her version of things, and I believed her without questioning it. But I've been talking to Michael, and he told me things I didn't know. About how we arrived at your house, about what happened. I still said nothing. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she continued. "I just wanted you to know that I now understand why you did what you did, and that I'm sorry for being part of the problem." They were simple but sincere words. "Thank you for calling, Linda," I finally said. "That means something to me." We hung up shortly after. I don't know if I'll ever speak to her again. I don't know if our relationship can be repaired, but the gesture mattered. It has been 6 months since that early morning on December 31st. when 12 people buzzed my intercom expecting me to simply open the door and disappear for their convenience. 6 months since I made the most terrifying and liberating decision of my life. Now, sitting on my small balcony watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I can say with certainty that I have no regrets. Some mornings I still wake up thinking about the old apartment, the memories I left there, the life I built over decades and sold in a matter of days. But those thoughts no longer come with pain. They come with a gentle melancholy, like when you remember a beautiful dream that has ended. My relationship with Michael has completely changed. I am no longer the mother who exists to solve his problems or make his life easier. We are two adults who respect each other, who seek each other out because they want to be together, not because one needs something from the other. He comes to visit every week. Sometimes he brings food we buy together at the market. Sometimes we just sit and have coffee and talk about nothing important. He tells me about his work without expecting me to understand all the technical details. I tell him about my knitting classes in the park, about Rose and the other ladies, about the book I'm reading. They are simple but real conversations. He and Madison finally went to couples therapy. According to Michael, it has been difficult but necessary. She is learning to let go of control. He is learning to set boundaries. I don't know if their marriage will survive. Honestly, some damage is too deep to be fully repaired. But that is not my battle. I did my part. I saved myself. Now he has to decide whether to save his own or let go of what no longer works. Madison has not contacted me directly. Through Michael, I learned that she eventually admitted she had crossed a line, though she still believes my reaction was exaggerated. I don't expect a full apology from her. Some people can never fully admit when they are wrong because their ego is too fragile. Madison's family disappeared from my life as quickly as they had appeared. Linda called that one time and then nothing more. I don't know what happened to them, where they are, if they still speak ill of me at their family gatherings. And I discovered something wonderful. I don't care. For years, I worried so much about what others thought, about keeping the peace, about being liked and accepted. Now I understand that the peace I achieved by sacrificing my dignity was never real peace. It was just silence bought with pieces of my soul. My life now is small, but entirely my own. I wake up when I want. I eat what I want for breakfast. I spend my days doing exactly as I please without asking anyone's permission. I read books until 3 in the morning if I feel like it. I leave dirty dishes in the sink all night if I'm tired. I rearrange the furniture every 2 weeks because I can. I eat ice cream straight from the container while watching old movies. These are small freedoms that may seem insignificant to others, but to me, they are revolutionary. The knitting group in the park became my new chosen family. There are 6 women between 60 and 75 years old, all with their own stories of loss and survival. One of them, named Martha, also sold her house after her adult children tried to force her into a nursing home. Another, Carmen, stopped speaking to her eldest daughter after years of emotional abuse. Not all the stories are dramatic, but we all share something fundamental. We learned that it's okay to choose yourself, even when the world tells you you're selfish for doing so. With the money left from the sale of the apartment, besides paying my rent in advance, I opened a savings account that I won't touch unless absolutely necessary. The rest I invested conservatively with the help of a financial advisor David recommended. I have enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life without depending on anyone. That financial independence gives me a security I had never felt before. I know that if something happens, if I get sick, if I need help, I have the resources to handle it without having to beg for favors or endure humiliation. A month ago, I adopted a cat. He's an old animal, 11 years old, gray with white patches, that no one wanted from the shelter because everyone looks for kittens. His name is Steve. Ironically, the same name as Madison's father, though I wasn't thinking of that when I chose him. He's a calm cat who spends most of the day sleeping on the armchair by the window. At night, he climbs onto my bed and purrs against my leg. It's simple but comforting companionship. He demands nothing but food and water. He doesn't judge, doesn't criticize, doesn't invade. He is the perfect companion for this stage of my life. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't made that decision. If I had continued to be the accommodating Eleanor, the perfect mother-in-law, the self-sacrificing mother, I would probably still be in that large apartment, waiting for Michael's calls, enduring the invasive visits from Madison's family, swallowing my discomfort day after day until there was nothing left of me. I would have eventually died, maybe in a few years, maybe in a decade, without having truly lived a single day for myself. That alternate version of my future terrifies me more than anything. I understand now that what I did was not revenge. It was survival. I didn't sell the apartment to punish Michael or Madison. I sold it to save myself from disappearing completely. And though the price was high, though I lost things I cannot get back, though there are relationships that will never be what they were, I gained something infinitely more valuable. I won myself back. This morning, as I prepared my coffee in the Italian coffee maker that survived the move, I thought of that first sentence I said to myself 6 months ago. The day I discovered my son had given away my home without my permission, I understood that I had lost more than just my privacy. I had lost my place in the world. But I was wrong. I hadn't lost it. I had just lent it out for too long to people who didn't value it. And now, I have it back. My place in the world is not an apartment. It's not being the perfect mother or the accommodating mother-in-law. My place in the world is exactly where I am now, in a small space that smells of coffee and lavender, surrounded by plants I care for, with an old cat purring on the armchair, living a life I consciously chose to build. The moral of my story is not simple or comfortable. I can't say that everything turned out perfectly, or that there were no losses, but I can say this. Sometimes, to reclaim your peace, you have to be willing to lose everything. And when you finally do it, when you really stand firm in your truth and say, no more, you discover that the only thing you truly lose is the weight that was never yours to carry. The rest, everything that really matters, comes with you. And that, after 69 years of existing for others, is more than enough. Now I know that home isn't where you live, but where you are heard. And for the first time in a long time, I am listening to myself.